Hey everybody, welcome to another lesson of learning Japanese. Today we're going to cover a really important topic, and that is the potential form. Alright, potential form. So potential form, we've actually covered this before, but it was a different construct. It was using just the dictionary form of the verb followed by the phrasing koto ga dekimasu. And this was using the actual verb dekiru, which means to be able to do. So all we were really doing in that sense was saying, I am able to do this verb literally, but there's actually a more commonly used conjugation in which we just conjugate the verb itself without adding the extra verb to be able to do. So in this video, we're going to do that. We're going to cover the conjugations of the actual verbs themselves to be able to mean to be able to do, instead of using dekiru as a helping verb basically to convey that. So that's the more elementary way of doing potential form for verbs, but it is a pretty valuable fallback because for this method that we're going to cover today, it has a lot of different guidelines. So if you do get confused and there's a new verb that you learned and you don't know how to conjugate it into its potential form right away, you can use just the dictionary form with koto ga dekiru as a fallback. But nonetheless, we do also need to learn this because it's very valuable and it's gonna be very necessary when we talk to people in casual conversation or whatever, and they're gonna be using this on and off. So like the name implies, the potential form is used to express the ability to do a certain verb, and the potential form, the conjugation for the potential form is going to be different depending onる-verbs and u-verbs. So we're going to doる-verbs first, andる-verbs are usually always easier than u-verbs when we're conjugating, just because u-verbs have their own subset of other verb categories and whatnot. Soる-verbs are simple. We just drop the ru at the end ofる-verbs in their dictionary form, and we replace that with ra-reru, and that is going to be three characters: ra, re, and ru. So as an example, if we have the verb taberu, to eat, we drop the ru, so we have tabe, and then we add rareru, so taberareru is to be able to eat. Similarly, if we have the verb oboeru, which means to remember, we drop the ru at the end, so we have oboe, and then we add rareru, so oboerareru means to be able to remember. Okay, so that's simple enough for ru-verbs. We have that. We just drop the ru and we add rareru. Now let's move on to the u-verbs. So in the potential form, we kind of luck out with u-verbs because they're actually pretty simple too, as opposed to some other conjugations. For u-verbs, we simply just drop the u at the end of the u-verb and replace it with eru, which is going to be two characters, e and ru. So for the verb yomu, which means to read, we're going to drop the u at the end, and this may be kind of tricky because if you just look at the characters written there, we don't see an actual u, we see the u that is a part of mu. But we're going to drop the u, so basically that means we're going to leave that m there, which isn't technically a character in the Japanese language, but I guess you can drop half of a character and whatnot. So we drop the u there, we still have the m, so right now we have yom basically, and we add eru, so it's going to be yomeru, because when we combine the m with the e, it's going to change to me, which is an actual character in Japanese, so we have me. So yomeru is to be able to read. Similarly, we have the verb kaku, which means to write. Drop that u, the k is still there, so it's basically just kak right now. Then we add the eru, so it's going to be kakeru, to be able to write. Another verb, hanasu, we drop the u there, so we have hanas basically. We add the eru, so it's going to be hanaseru, and that is to be able to say or be able to speak. Next up we have the verb matsu, and this one's actually pretty tricky because we have matsu and we drop the u there, but technically if we just drop the u, we still have mats, and there's going to be the ts sound at the end. But if we recall from the original video, the very first video that this channel ever released, in the hiragana explanation, su, the character su, it's tsu and it sounds like su, but it's actually deviating from the row in the hiragana chart that corresponds to the letter t. So technically if we drop the u here, then it's just going to be mat instead of mats. So that nuance of the s is dropped too. Then when we change this into the potential form and we add that eru, the s is still gone, so it's just going to be materu instead of matseru. That's not right. So materu is to be able to wait. For the last u verb that we're going to do, we have iku, which means to go. It's a very common verb. We've used it maybe in almost every video basically. But iku is actually a unique case here. It actually has two potential forms. If we're not counting the koto ga dekiru thing a bit jigger, this actually has two potential forms. It can be either ikeru, which is in line with the guideline that we're following right now. We drop that u, then we add eru, so iku becomes ikeru, and that means to be able to go. But it can also be ikareru, and this is just kind of irregular, and there's no real need to know the actual grammar behind it. It's just the other one that you can use interchangeably with ikeru. So okay, so before we go into examples now, we got to cover some irregular cases. So the two irregular verbs here are going to be suru and kuru. We'll go with suru first because we actually already know suru. Suru's potential form is dekiru. And since suru means to do, it really makes sense because if we can use the dictionary form of a verb and follow it with koto ga dekiru, that basically just means I can be able to do the verb because suru means to do and I can do the verb. So that actually makes a lot of sense and it gives us some pretty good background information. So suru is the irregular verb that changes to dekiru in its potential form. The next irregular verb is kuru, and there's no real explanation behind this, but the potential form of kuru is going to be korareru. So this consists of 4 characters, ko, ra, re, and ru. So korareru is the potential form of kuru, to come. So to be able to come is korareru. Okay, now we'll just jump into some quick examples to get a better direct feel of this. So for our first example sentence, we have the line, kono kanji ga rikai dekimasu ka? And what this is basically saying is just, can you understand these Chinese characters or these kanji? So kono is the first word here. It's going to mean this or these. After kono is kanji, which means kanji basically. It means Chinese characters. After kanji, we have the particle ga, and this is the particle that's going to be used with the potential form here. So that's going to replace the particle o. After ga, we have rikai, which is a verbal noun. Rikai means understanding basically. So rikai suru is going to mean to understand, and which means if we change the suru and conjugate it into its potential form into dekiru, rikai dekiru means to be able to understand, and here we have rikai dekimasu ka, which is rikai dekiru in its polite form, followed by the sentence ending particle ka to make it into a question. So kono kanji ga rikai dekimasu ka is basically just asking, can you understand these kanji or these Chinese characters? For our next example sentence, we have the line, niku ga taberareru ka? And this is also a really simple sentence. First up, we have niku, which means meat. We have the particle ga right after it because this is the particle again that we're using to replace the direct object particle o when we're using potential form. After that, we have taberu in its potential form, which is taberareru. And after the taberareru is going to be the particle ka to end the sentence to mark it as a question. So the speaker here is asking the addressee, can you eat meat? Niku ga taberareru ka? For our next example sentence, we have the line, Mada 18 sai dakara osake ga nomemasen. So what this sentence is saying is, because I'm still 18 years old, I cannot drink alcohol yet. Or I can't drink alcohol yet because I'm still 18. So if we break down this sentence bit by bit, first up we have mada, which means still. We have 18 sai, which just means 18 years old. Ju there is going to be 10, and then hachi is going to be 8, and sai is going to be the unit count for age, basically. After that, we have dakara, which is basically just desu kara in its plain form. So kara is the conjunction that means because, so because I am still 18 years old. And now we move on to the second part of the sentence, which is osake ga nomemasen. Osake is going to be basically sake or alcohol. It has the character o before it because that's a beautifier, and it's modifying sake because sake is considered a culturally rich Japanese entity base. We'll cover beautifiers in a future video, so don't worry about that too much. It doesn't have that much to do with grammar, to be honest. After that, we have the particle ga, just like the grammar construct requires. Then we have nomemasen, and this is the potential form of nomu, which means to drink. Then it's also modified into its negative form. So the potential form of nomu is again going to be nomeru because we dropped the u and then replace it with eru. So we have nomeru, and when we want to change it to its negative polite form, we change the ru into masen. So nomemasen means not be able to drink. So osake ga nomemasen means to not be able to drink sake, and then we combine that with everything else in the sentence. Because I am still 18 years old, I cannot drink alcohol or sake. Okay, so one last thing to note before we end this lesson, and that is about progress, basically, and change. So the Japanese language is actually pretty reputable as being intermittently changing, in that there are some things that changed about its grammar that aren't officially accepted, and they'll be seen in some sources, but in some other sources the traditional way of speaking or grammatizing things will be there instead of the new way. So this potential form here is actually a pretty good example of that, because recently the Japanese language has been changing and it's come to accept a different conjugation for the ru verbs in their potential form. Instead of dropping the ru and replacing it with rareru, some verbs can just drop the ru and add reru instead without the ra in the beginning. But it's super important that when I say some verbs, that literally means just some verb. Some other verbs have not gotten this treatment at all. So if you take some random verb that's a ru verb and you conjugate it with reru instead of rareru, some people might have no idea what you're talking about, or just think that you're completely bad at Japanese or something like that. So you might think that it's just best off to learn the rareru way and just use that every time. But to further complicate things, this new method of just reru, it actually appears in like newspapers and other sources of media currently, so it is actually an important thing to know and a distinction to make inside your head whenever you come across them. And of course, this in turn is going to actually complicate the passive tense of verbs, because the passive tense of verb also involves the conjugation of something along the lines of reru. So yeah, it is a complication, but it's not like English and other languages don't have their flaws too, so let's keep learning Japanese.